this Tech Talk, we'll be talking some more about acoustics, room acoustics, and treatment. Room treatment and room correction software. Well, we already did an whole Tech Talk about room correction software, Roland, but the big question now is, why doesn't room treatment suffice to get a great performing sound system in your listening room?
To a degree it does. I would always start with a good sounding room, and a room that, without measuring or analyzing it too much, a good sounding room is a good sounding room, like a room where you could have a good conversation in, which doesn't sound too echoey, where some drapes are there and carpet and furniture and bookcases and so on. So electronic room correction is not a replacement for a good sounding room and speaker placement and so on. But there are so many issues in room acoustics that it's very difficult to really find them and treat them in the right way. And that is better in the digital domain. But of course, there are also many tools that you can do, like diffusers, absorbers, bass traps, and so on. So that's another way you could choose.
Okay. And what could be problems in a room?
The problems can be, the easy thing to understand and to almost see in the room is high frequency reflections. So everyone understands that a window reflects sound. Everyone understands that a room wall where there's no furniture, no nothing, that will reflect wall. So does the ceiling. So does a wooden floor or stone floor or marble floor. It's kind of easy to understand what this does, and it's kind of easy to do something about it. You don't have to, study acoustics for that. It's like if you put something in front of a wall, if you have a carpet on front of that wooden floor, you will improve the sound. It's much more difficult to understand and hear the problems in the low frequencies. And we cannot see sound waves. So what's happening in the bass, it's completely unknown and invisible to us. And they're not even cues like a window or glass where you understand that it reflects. In the low frequencies, we are pretty clueless. There are things called, many people have heard about it, standing waves, which happen in the length of the room, but some people forget that it's also the width of the room and the height of the room. So you basically have standing waves in 3 dimensions. That's already a starting point. Then there are things called speaker boundary impulse response. That's the speaker, especially in the low frequencies, interacting with the wall behind it and the wall to the side of it. And the other speaker again does the same on the other wall. And also the floor. So many people forget that the floor is also a wall where the sound, especially low frequencies, bounce back and interfere with the original sound. So you have already around the speaker these boundaries, and that's what the boundary impulse response and related problems come from. And you have the same again where you sit. You have a listener boundary impulse response. So if you sit too close to a wall behind you, or not even too close, any wall behind or besides you, also changes the sound and manipulates the sound. Allison effects. So you have a bunch of problems. That's what's so difficult in the low frequencies. Listeners always describe, I have a boomy bass. Yeah, but the problem is much more complicated at much more frequencies.
The modern way of building homes is offering a lot of challenges, I think, yes. Because we use a lot of hard surfaces, a lot of windows, a lot of concrete, a lot of hard surface on the floor and the ceiling. So it's one reflecting area.
Yeah.
So that's gonna sound terrible.
It does. And everyone knows when they've moved house or moved into a new flat, before you move in and you come in there and you look around and you listen to yourself speaking, talking. It's like, oh my God, I can never listen to music in this room. That would be impossible. And then a little bit magic happens once you moved in all the furniture and, have some things there. It already sounds better. And that already guides you that it's not impossible. But in the low frequencies, it's much more complicated. But of course, in the high frequencies, you can, of course, look at diffusers and absorbers and so on. But I would always start, before I do all these professional treatments, I would always start with what I would call natural absorption, and that is drapes, and that is carpet, and that is, nice furniture. You don't have to study acoustics for that.
Yeah, that would have been my next question because of all these kind of solutions like diffusers, bass traps, and stuff. They are in the professional area, and my question would have been, what can we do as normal people with normal stuff to improve sound? But you already said like drapes and carpets and
follow your ears. You will always notice when you do improvements. You don't have to start with all these professional tools and diffusers and absorbers. Start with normal things, move things around, and follow your ears.
But can we say in general, Roland, that acoustics is a really interesting subject, but it is rather undervalued by most hi-fi lovers, because they think when they invest in a big amp, in big speakers, in shiny cables, they can tune the sound and make it to their liking, but they forget about acoustics.
Yeah, as we said in an earlier episode, the sound of the loudspeaker and the sound of your room is one. Our mind cannot easily separate that. So it is one thing, and it's tempting to solve it with a different cable or a better cable or a different kind of speaker. But I think many people have realized and experienced over time. Then they changed this, they changed that, and I still have the same problem. And that is because these problems are invisible. We don't hear sound waves. We don't see sound waves. We hear sound waves, luckily. We don't see sound waves. So we have no clue by looking around in the room and listening to music what the problems are. And that makes it so difficult to nail it down and to do something about it.
Yeah. So why isn't acoustical treatment enough?
It is enough in a way that these tools, these diffusers, absorbers, are very effective. They are designed to do what they're supposed to do. So do something in certain frequencies at a certain amount of decibel. But when I describe a frequency in decibel, you can already sense like, okay, where is my problem frequency? At how many decibel? Do I know that? And that already tells you what these tools are made for. They are made for sound engineers. They are made for studios. They are made for professional environments where you have to measure the problem and then do something specific about it. And that's not my living room. That's not someone else's living room. That's not even if I have a separate listening room. It's not a studio. So first of all, without analyzing the actual problem, I would never really buy lots of diffusers, absorbers, and bass traps, because they're all made for something very specific. And it would be the hard way to find that out if you just buy a bunch of absorbers and diffusers and put it on the wall and then see what happens. That's trial and error, and that's tapping in the dark, and I wouldn't do that. And it's also not very cost effective. You buy all these things, and I see that very often from customers. They buy all these foam and put it on the sidewalls, and you, of course, do something about the problem, but you don't end up with a better listening experience. You end up with a more dead room, or you kill a fly with a big stone, and you absorb many other frequencies which were not the problem in the first place, in the high frequency as well as the low frequencies. So in the high frequencies, if you have these big foams, of course it does not only treat the problem frequencies, it absorbs high frequencies, period, over very broad band. So you end up with less sound energy in the room, where you're saying, oh, that's good. No, it's not always good. We need some kind of natural room sound so that it actually sounds good, and even more so in the low frequencies. Let's talk about these, my favorite tools, bass traps. And I would say that's a trap. And because bass traps are very, very broadband, and usually someone at home has a problem at a certain frequency. Let's imagine 90 hertz, just to make up the case. Mm-hmm. But bass traps effectively absorb bass broadband, let's say between 60 hertz and 100 hertz. So what happens, you solve the problem, but you absorb all the bass, you end up with a lean sounding bass. That's what I mean with killing a fly with a big stone and overcorrecting. And when you have this system sounding very lean, what you do is you try to turn up the volume, but the bass is still absorbed, so it will still sound lean. But the driver or the woofer moves like crazy, and the amplifier has to amplify more.
Yeah.
But you don't have a better sound experience, and that's what makes these tools and professional things complicated, because they are professional tools first off. So you have to know your problem to get it right, and it's very easy to overcompensate, to end up with new problems and a less preferred sound instead of fixing the problem.
Yeah. So if not used right, it can work against you. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very, very often here with people who don't have a correction system, that they describe the problems and then they already say, I've tried this and this and this, but somehow I don't like it. And that has to do with don't use the wrong tools. And going back to correction and digital things, it's a much more precise tool.
So I always believe that there were some like golden guidelines to make a room sound better. And you try to treat first and second reflection with some diffusion. You could use diffusion behind the speakers for the wall reflections, the same behind your listening position and above the listening area. But yeah, you made your point that it's if you're not informed well, you could end up with a with a room that sounds more bad.
Yeah, and doesn't look very pretty. So my partner would kick me out if I do all these things that you listed. But let's imagine I have a listening room and I can do all these things. Again, it's so easy to overcompensate. It's so easy to buy a thick piece of foam and put it left and right at the first reflection point. And of course, it does something. It helps to a degree. But absorbing sound is not always the answer, because by how many decibel does that foam piece absorb? By the right amount or too much? Do you kill all the side reflections at the, in theory, correct first reflection points? But by how much? How thick is that foam panel? You can buy these foams in different thicknesses, and they all have a certain frequency pattern and all absorbed by a certain amount of decibel. By how much? Do you know that?
Yeah.
No, I just bought this thing and put it there. Yeah, but that's not always the right thing to do. The good thing is, before you buy all these things, you can test it basically at home with putting something there that absorbs sound and see are we going the right way. But
what I hear, that data is key. So you end up with a better result when using a room correction software, because it analyzes, it gets you data, and tries to optimize the performance. So, but it's all based on data and what we just discussed, like introducing a foam panel. Yeah, you just get some basic data, like if you use the 5 centimeter thick panel or the 10 centimeter thick panel, you get some idea of how it reduces something, but that's a whole different ball game than a room correction software.
Absolutely. Yeah,
you get much more data about your room. It's mathematical.
Yeah, it's the more clever way. It's the more clever way to do it. And again, I'm not saying that a good room is not desirable. A good sounding room is not desirable. Have a good sounding room, but be careful with these tools and how many you need of them. And if you talk about the panels and the frequency and the thickness, even that doesn't answer the question, how many do you need? Do you treat the whole wall or half the wall or 1/3 of the wall? And usually you find out too late once the things are on the wall that you think, that sounds pretty dead now, so let's remove these things again. It's a long way. It's a long shot. And that's where collecting better data and doing the right thing with this data, with the right algorithm, is the much more clever way. With some limits, because the reflecting window will always be reflecting, We cannot change the window. With no DSP in the world can do that. So it's still good. That's what I'm saying. To have the right amount of absorption, natural materials in a room. Do that, please, because the window will always be reflecting. But there are so many things, especially in the low frequencies, where it's very difficult to treat it right.
Last question for this episode, Roland. Does a listening room with the optimal acoustical performance, does that exist? And how would that sound like?
I know how that sounds like because I've been to many rooms which measure like a dream, so measure very linear, and you can hear. Usually these rooms are for comparing speakers, and they do this job very well. So speaker A, B, and C sound very different in a completely neutral room. But I have to say personally, all these rooms which measure like a dream, when I say that, I say getting close to a linear sound. It's not a room where I would sit for hours and listening to my favorite music. Sorry to say. It's great for analyzing sound and to comparing speaker A, B, and C, as I said, or amplifier A, B, C. It's great for that, or finding faults in a recording, or deciding which demo tracks to use. You need either good headphones or a room which is taken out. But I've often been into rooms, can also be even at audio shows or at some customer's home, where you think, wow, this sounds amazing. This speaker or this system or in this room, that sounds wonderful. I can almost promise you, if you would measure that wonderful room, the outcome would not be linear. Linear rooms and good sounding rooms are almost two different things. So that's very interesting.
But how difficult is that, for example, for speaker manufacturers to think about that the speaker will end up in totally different rooms all over the board?
It's a black box. That's last part of the audio chain. How does this speaker perform in a real room is a black box, because you would have tested. You have to test it in millions of rooms, because every room is different, and you cannot do that. So of course, in the first phase and second phase of developing a loudspeaker, it has to measure right in an anechoic chamber, in a totally dead linear room. But don't confuse that room with the room where the speaker has to sound good. Well, actually, two speakers have to sound good. So of course, I'm not saying that linear measurement is wrong. That's a correct thing. But good sounding rooms don't necessarily, if you would measure them, don't necessarily give you that straight line of sound. The speaker also interacts with the room in a good way.
So it's wrong to think that room correction software, it's in the name. It doesn't correct the speaker or improves the performance of the speaker. It just elevates how the performance of the system in the room, because it looks to the room acoustics and not to how the speaker itself.
That's right. Ideally, the room acoustic or the algorithm behind it understands what the speaker is good at, and it understands what the room acoustical problems are, and separates that. And that you can only do with collecting more data. And I think that is one secret, you could say, of RoomPerfect, that many people wonder, why does it take so many measurements and not just one? Yeah, to collect more data, to have a better, deeper understanding on what goes on in this room and what is the speaker really like. And the more data you collect at more points, you understand better, or there's more better data, and so the algorithm can do a better job. So it's the algorithm and better data collection. Say it in a very theoretical way.
Okay. So what do we have to remind of this episode? A good listening room, a good sounding listening room is key, and you can improve your listening room with some natural stuff like drapes, a good carpet. If you want to use professional stuff, be careful and get all the figures right. And in the end, the room correction software will again improve that result even more.
Yeah.
That's the big lesson of today.
That's a nice summary.
Thank you for watching. See you at the next one.